Alright, so now we've got all our ceiling joists in. We've actually started on the rafters. We already have this all figured out. I showed in a previous video, if you go back to our large four season room, how we can figure out what all these different angles are and everything. We're using different strings, and there's also different types of levels and all that kind of stuff. But on this one, we just used a level and a square, which is pretty similar to another way that I showed on in one of those videos for the large four season room. If you go back and watch those episodes, especially the ones on the rafters and all that. So we figured out that the existing roof here, because that's what we're trying to match, is a 712. So if you're wanting to go with a 712, what that means is that it is going to go up 7 inches for every 12 inches over into the house it goes. So this bottom section here is your common rafters. If you're wanting to go with a 712 pitch, then you simply need to line up the 7 right here, which is also, in this case, it doesn't always land dead on, but with a 712 pitch, that is a 30-degree angle. So we're simply going to line it up on a 7 and score that line there. And in an old house like this, now if I'm doing a new construction, like on that large four season room, on the large four season room, when I did that one, it was, even though it was connected to an old house, it was connected perpendicular to it, as opposed to running in series with it. So with it connecting perpendicularly to it, we could simply build both walls out, and then I could use the mathematics for triangulation, cosine, tangent, and all that to actually figure out exactly what the lengths of the rafter should be. However, in an old house, stuff is not level, stuff is not square, stuff is not straight. This is something I've explained in previous videos. So with that, on an old house where you are actually connecting in series to it, so the main house is already right here, and we're just continuing it. We don't really want to use full level mathematics when we tie into it. Now, from that point on, it should all line up if it's done correctly, which when we started doing it, once we started going out, everything was good. But what we had to do in this case is, on one side of the house, the rafters were actually about 1 1/8 inches longer to the is called the bird's mouth. The bird's mouth is where the rafter, and I'll show you the notch on the other end later, but it's where the rafter is notched. So essentially it's going to be, you're going to have this same angle, and then you're going to come out at 90 degrees from that, just roughly like this, and you're going to cut out this section and leave this. Well, you can't see that, it's not on camera, sorry. But you're going to essentially come out at 90 degrees here, and you're going to cut out this section here only, while leaving the rest of it all in full contact. And that'll actually go, on the other end, there'll be the rafter tail and everything. Again, I'll show that on the other end. But from the bird's mouth up to the top of the rafter, which is what I just originally marked here, and I'm going to cut that in a second, to the bird's mouth was about 1 1/8 inches different from one side of the house to the other. And that actually coincided to another issue that we found. So also, the overhang on one side of the house is 21 inches, but on the other side it's only 20. So the overhang is not even the same from one side of the house to the other. So that could have been from multiple different things, quite possibly simply when they put up their ridge pole, they didn't quite get it dead center. And then they just let it continue with that going all the way through. Now, once everything's braced up, then it's not really going to move. It's not going to cause an issue. And again, nobody's ever really going to know until you put a tape measure on it. So typically when I'm doing a new construction on that large four season room, it was very nice because everything was exactly the same. Because it was basically new walls on both sides. However, except for where we had to tie in where it was adjacent to the kitchen, and that where right there we had to basically cut every single rafter differently. So we adjusted with that here, and then once we got out to the location where the master suite is and the roof jumps down where there's not a porch, because where there's a porch it's a full length of the roof, and I'll show you that when we get up there too. But once we got past that point, then I'm able to go, and now both rafters on both sides are being exactly the same, but I needed to match it before that point. The other thing that we're doing here, and I'll show you that down there as well, is here the original rafters are 2x6s. For the span that they are spanning, I'm going with 2x8s. Technically, they should be able to work with the 2x6 as long as you put some bracing in there and all that. But the 2x8 just gives it that much more stability, and I'm going to go with the 2x8. However, on the ends where what is called the rafter tail, which is the overhang that the soffit is usually mounted to. Now out here it's historical, where you can see the rafter tail, so there'll be no soffit there. But at the end, I'm cutting the 2x8 down to a 2x6. So from the exterior, it will look the same. Kind of similar to what we did underneath with the framing, where the main structure is on the inside and then we cantilevered out so that even though that's not originally where it would be, it is now going to tie in with the brick the way that the rest of the house is. So I'm going to do something very similar, kind of, as far as it's just I'm beefing everything up, but then I am dropping it down to the original house sizing in the location where it doesn't really matter because it has got extra support. It's not supporting a lot of roofing material there. It's not spanning a long distance. It's only cantilevering out, like I said, 20 inches or 21 on the other side. So it's only 21 inches as it's going out. Same thing, like I said, downstairs we had 2x10s. I beefed everything up to 2x10s, but then where it goes and cantilevers out, it's only a 2x8, but that's only spanning about 3 inches. So that right there, for that span, the 2x8 is perfectly fine. But that's what we've done here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to simply cut this, and then we can get our measurement from this top point here, right here, if I can get that camera back. So from this top point right here down for the length of the rafter. So I'm going to cut that real quick, and then we'll get down to the bird's mouth. So now this is the top of our rafter, and for our bird's mouth pivot point, we're going to just hook right on to the very top point of that. So the next thing that we're going to want is our intersecting point for the bird's mouth. So what we are working with is we got 139 1/8 to the intersecting point of the bird's mouth. And the way that I will usually do that is from that top point, you're kind of using the tape. I'm doing it in a little spurt so as to try and match that. You're kind of using the top of the rafter as a pivot point of a compass, so to speak, in geometry. So I don't want this to be square. I want it to run at the curvature of as if that was a compass. There we go, if I can think right. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do two things. One, we're going to go ahead and make sure that we are lined up with the top here of this rafter at the 7/12 pitch, because we want to maintain that at the head of the bird's mouth. And then we're going to slide this down to the depth that we want to leave remaining. And typically, in most cases, I will actually do it the other way because I want to, say, take out a certain amount. However, in this, I'm trying to match an existing house. So in the existing house, they were measuring from the top point here down to where it meets at that bird's mouth 3 1/4 inches. So I want to maintain that 7/12 pitch, and I want to slide this down until that 3 1/4 mark right there just barely intersects with that line that I just made. And when I get there, I want to double check, make sure that I haven't shifted this like this at all, because that can easily happen when you're sliding it down through. Double check it, make sure I'm good. And then what I will do is I will go ahead and do this right at that 3 1/4. Just, it helps with a reference point later. I'll go ahead and draw this down through, because you only really need from here down originally, but it just makes doing the rafter tail easier to just draw it all the way. Then what you can do is you can turn this rafter square. This is actually called a rafter square. So you have small squares, big squares. The little 6" by 6" square is considered a framing square. This, or no, it's a speed square. I'm sorry. A framing square actually looks just like an L. A speed square is a little 6 by 6. It's just for quick speed. You can carry it around easily in your back pocket. This is called a rafter square, and it's oversized like this so that it makes it easier to do. So what you can do, and let's move the camera, is now that we have this line here, you can take this edge right here, is the easiest way to do it. Line it right up on that, where you put that little mark, and then you want to line this end up down with the tail at the end of that bird's mouth. And what this is going to do is this creates that 90 degree, this right here, this angle is going to be 90 degrees. And what that's going to do is, if you got the 7/12 down there, you got a 7/12 pitch here, what that does is this portion, when you cut this out, this portion here is going to sit directly down 90 degrees on the wall, and that's going to transfer all that weight down here onto this wall. So you want that good. That also helps if you're trying to put these up by yourself, because you can basically kind of just put it up there, and once it's there, it will pretty much just set there, as long as you don't tip the other end too much up or down. And so, I mean, I've done a lot of these rafters alone, single-handed, and as long as you get that bird's mouth good and have enough meat there, you're going to be able to do that much easier alone. So the next thing is we'll back this camera up some. Let's see. So you can still see that point there somewhat. What I'm going to do is, my rafter tail is 21 inches. So you can do that in 2 spots. You can measure from down here, or you can measure from up here. Generally, it's going to be easier to measure it, and you can just take, I'll usually do it this way, just because it makes it easier. You can line that 21 right up on there when you're doing it by yourself, because then you can simply just mark at the end of the tape a lot easier. If you got someone to help you, you can stand here, down here like this, and you can have them make sure that it's held right on, or you can eyeball it, but it is much easier if you're working alone to just lock it there, line it up, and then just mark the end of the tape. So another, just easier to do single-handed. So then we got our point here. Okay, I was trying to see if that is in the camera. And again, we're going to do the same thing. You're just going to line up on that pivot point. That's all that is a pivot point. And let's see. Back you up again. There we go, I think. And then again, line up that 7/12. So you're going to use that 7/12, or whatever your pitch of your roof is. You're going to use that multiple times. Now, once you've already done this and you got a good system going where it's all good, you can actually use a pattern, which we do have. This is the pattern right here that we're using. I used it out of a nice 20-foot spruce that was very, very straight. So the reason being is, of course, it's extremely straight. It makes a good pattern to where you have uniformity. And then the one last thing. So again, we are working with 2x8s, but we want these to look like 2x6s when we're done. So all that we're going to do that, with this rafter square, it has these notches here. These notches are to help you when you're trying to score a line. So you don't have to sit here with a full level and everything. A 2x6 is 5.5 inches, which is right here. And you always want to pull when you're doing this. So I can simply lock my pen in right here at the 5.5 point, and I can pull it towards me. And see that? A nice straight line. Whenever you're doing this, so it depends. So if I'm doing 5 1/2, that's here. You get 5 1/4, 5, 5 3/4, 6, 6 1/4. So it goes in 1/4 inch increments, which usually is going to work just fine for a rafter. You're not going to usually be off that. But if it's 5 1/2, which is against here, you want to pull that triangle point to you, making sure that you keep this against here. The reason why is because if you're following it and you're going this way, and you get in one of these little, you know, there are slight grooves created by all of these rings right here from the tree. And that can, your pen can follow that. This way, you're allowing the rafter square to hold your pen in the exact spot. So if you were doing, if I was doing 5 1/4, I would pull it this way instead. Or 5 inches, again, this direction. So that's another little tip, is make sure that if you're doing this, always, you know, put your pen in the triangle, whichever side you're going with, and then pull the whole thing. So now we've got our whole rafter tail, notch, and everything marked out. We can take a look at that. Of course, I already know, of course, I'm not using these lines, but so we're going to cut it and we're going to leave all of this. We're going to cut this here. So we're going to go ahead and cut that, and we'll have another rafter finished.